Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you are joining us from. Welcome to our webinar. You don't have a project problem. You are starting projects the wrong way. I know some of you might be looking at that title and wonder, what is this all about? Does it sound a little bit strong to some of you? Or maybe confusing? So we tend to focus a lot of the time on problems in projects, especially if those projects are in execution. But what we are going to do today is look at what happens before projects get into execution. What happens at the start of the project, right at the idea stage, before anything gets built, approved, or delivered? Because that's most of the time where a lot of those issues emerge, where a lot of those issues are already set in motion. So, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you who know me, those of you who don't know me, welcome. Some of my favorite people I tend to talk on LinkedIn and in my life. My name is Iwona Wilson, and it's my absolute pleasure to be with you today. Originally from Poland, I spent about 17 years working on capital projects in the UK, Australia, and for the last 5 years in the US, mainly in the oil and gas industry. Initially, I started in quality assurance in London, and later on, I moved into helping teams through the early stage project development and decision making. And later today, I will tell you a little bit more about the moment when I had the awakening that really shifted my career from quality assurance to facilitation and governance. So, anyway, whatever I've worked, whatever teams I worked with, I have consistently seen the same patterns that projects don't usually fail because of the challenges that show up in the execution. But they do fail, or let's say they struggle because of how they started. And that's what we are going to talk about today. So, before we dive in, let me quickly share with you how we're going to spend the next 90 minutes. It might take us a little bit less than 90 minutes. I see there's a few more people joining. It might take us a little bit less than 90 minutes, but it won't take us more than 90 minutes as I'm straight after the webinar on a plane to see one of our clients. So, what we're going to do today, we're going to start by reflecting together on the current state, how we typically start projects. And then I'm going to walk you through the 5 mistakes I often see across different teams. And eventually we shift into what actually work, a different way of looking at projects. And that's where I'll introduce you to opportunity framing and decision gate project, a decision gate process. And towards the end, those of you who really want to go deeper and use some of those principles in your own projects, you will have the opportunity to do so. And of course, we will leave time right at the end for questions and discussion. So that's the plan for the next 90 minutes. Sounds good? Okay, so who this webinar is ready for? This is not a generic webinar about project management. This webinar is really tailored for those of you who already work on real projects, especially if you work in complex environments like the ones in the oil and gas, renewables, mining, maybe infrastructure project, or maybe you're involved in cross-functional strategic initiatives or even AI implementation. So if you are someone leading those projects, or maybe contributing to those projects, or influencing key decisions, or maybe working with cross-functional teams or your key stakeholders or decision makers, you are in the right place. If you are a consultant or a facilitator, that's even better. Most consultants are usually brought in to deliver, but today you will have insights about how can we shape projects right at the start. How can we tap into and help teams to provide better clarity right at the start? So if you are someone who wants to learn how to influence directions of the project, not just execution, and be the one bringing clarity in that uncertain and complex environment, this webinar is for you. You're in the right place. So I would love to find out who is in the room. So I'd love to find out a little bit more about what are some of the projects that you are working on. So when you're ready, if you can, if you're not driving a car, jump into the chat and share as much as you can in few words. What are some of those projects that you are working on? So today will be a little bit different. I'm not going to abuse you with tons of PowerPoint slides, but I will share enough just to really help you to look at and how we can look differently into projects. So rather than just tons of slides, I will be asking you different questions. And my invitation to you is to participate as much as you can, contribute, and really reflect on your own experiences as we go. Okay, so I don't see many interactions, but I am looking at the chat box. So whenever you're ready, jump in. And oh, there's a few more people joining. Jump in and share briefly what are some of those projects. Thank you, Matt. Family Office Strategic Initiatives, project engineering for railway industry. That's great. So those information are really useful for me because they will allow me to tailor some of those examples and case studies to really make this webinar, especially that we don't have a huge amount of people today on the webinar, to make it more beneficial for you. I can electromechanical, civil, construction. I know you are in all kinds of industry, including especially oil and gas and mining. Okay, well, let's get it started. So my favorite quote by Albert Einstein, it's the one that talks about the law of insanity. So insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. So look at that quote from my favorite scientist, Albert Einstein. And I want you to think about it for a moment. What do you think? What does that mean in the context of projects? And I see Daniel. Great to see you, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're looking at the law of insanity. Insanity is doing the same things over and over again and expecting different results. Looking at the projects that you are working on. Okay, what does it actually mean? We keep repeating the same patterns. Okay, we keep starting projects the same way. Maybe we keep making the same assumptions over and over again. Maybe we are using the same processes and frameworks over and over again. Maybe we are using the same people for work over and over again. And then we are surprised. We keep rushing over and over again. That's right. And then we are surprised when outcomes don't change. So first of all, I really want to acknowledge those of you who show up today live and those of you who watch that recording later on, because you are those people who are willing to question how our projects get shaped, how they get selected, how they get defined. And this takes courage because the rest of the world is doing the other way around. It's way easier to follow what's already in place, to follow the same framework over and over again, to follow the same process and work with the same people. It's easier to do that than to step back and ask, are we actually solving the right problem? Are we even starting the right way? Have we got the right solution? Are we ready to execute? So the intention of this webinar is not just about improving our deliverer, but it's actually about learning and knowing that you can influence project success simply by thinking differently at the start, by framing better. We're going to talk about opportunity framing, by deciding earlier, and by choosing consciously what you want to focus on. And when that happens, something incredible happens because you get to be the one that brings energy to the room. You get to be seen as the one who is strategic in the way you influence outcome, not just deliver projects. And just think about the impact on your career. Because when you choose the right projects for the right reasons, you learn a skill set which will skyrocket your career. Okay, so that's what this webinar is really about. And I just want to share that I'm incredibly grateful for doing this work. And I learn from incredible coaches and mentors back in Australia from my time down in Perth in Australia, and also from my past, current, and future clients, how we can start our projects better and better. Okay, so let's get into this. So I want you to think about for a moment project that didn't go very well. Whether it was something to do for your client in the oil and gas or mining or engineering or a water management project, think about a recent project that maybe didn't go bad, but didn't go as well as you would have liked it to. It felt harder than it should have. Maybe things just kept shifting. Maybe issues kept reappearing. How would you describe that project in one word? Type in a chat. How would you describe that project in one word? Maybe it was complex. Maybe it was unclear. Okay. Whenever you're ready, jump in. How would you describe? If you don't want to type, that's fine. Think about it. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about the same project. Just reflect that and feel free to type yes or no in the chat or just think about it. Yeah, okay. It could be optimistic, like Peter said, or Tone, culture mismatched. Yeah. Okay. So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. I want you to go through that process with me. Was the problem or an idea clearly defined? Did everyone truly agree on what success looked like? Were the value drivers clear? Were we actually clear on why we're doing the project? Was there an alignment with a business strategy? Were decision makers generally aligned or they were just being informed? Did we explore real options? Was there a real debate or did things just like were already predefined? And how many of you started the project because leadership already approved this, or the CEO wanted it, or maybe the solution was chosen already from day one? And just be honest. And how many of you felt, at least at one time, that this might not be a good idea? And let me ask you one more question. When did that project actually started going wrong? Most people would say execution because that's what we tend to talk about the most. But here is what I want you to consider for a moment. What if we are not lacking capability in project management? There is plenty of courses that we can learn about how to execute better, faster. What if we were lacking clarity at the start? Because those early stages, as Akin said, during the initiation phase, that's where we are making key decisions that cost millions or even billions of dollars in some cases. And you can see that that initial stage, 10% of early work, often defines the rest of what follows next. So let me share with you a couple of slides. So I want you to So I want you to look at that slide because this is one of my favorite slides that really describes what we're going to talk about today. Because projects are often like an iceberg. We tend to focus on what is above the waterline. We tend to focus on what we measure. We talk about the cost overruns, schedule delays, execution issues. That's what get most of the attention. That's where we assign blame. That's where we write reports. You with me? But the real issue is what is often underneath the surface, the invisible things, the things that shape the outcome, but we don't really talk about it enough. The business project misalignment, the premature solution selection, the untested or even unidentified assumptions, the definition risk that hardly ever we find in our risk register. Because these are the things that set up our projects for struggle if they are unresolved. You with me? Before even execution begins. So, what is one of the most frustrating thing for you looking at that slide? So, look at those issues underneath the surface. Are those issues technical, sophisticated challenges? No, right? So if you look at those issues, the most frustrating for me are a lot of those issues are simple questions that if we allow a little bit of time right at the start, okay, it would have gone way easier during execution. But what happens is because we rush, we jump over those questions. We want to figure them out as we go because that's what looks good at the start. It looks like we are making a progress. So, what I'm going to share with you, if that sounds familiar, these are not random things. These are the patterns. So what I'm going to share with you are 5 mistakes that I see across many teams, many projects, many industries, regardless of how experienced the team is. So mistake number 1, starting with a solution. Who knows what I'm talking about? Projects don't start with a problem, they start with a solution. So, what is the problem with starting with a solution? Okay, have you seen this in your life? Most of the time, it feels like we are being efficient and we want to move fast and we want to show progress. But what we're actually doing is we are transferring uncertainty into execution. But hear me out, speed is not a problem. But starting execution without fully understanding what we're trying to achieve, that's the problem. Starting execution without fully understanding interfaces, without looking at options, without having clearly identified and agreed, consciously chosen trade offs, that is the problem. So, what looks very efficient at the start later on shows up as rework, scope changes, and frustration. Oh, mistake number 2, alignment without challenge. So, what do we actually say when we reach an alignment? Type in a chat. What do we actually say? We agreed quickly. Let's just move on, right? But what happens is everyone is nodding in agreement, but everyone is at the same time defining success differently. no real options are explored, and we don't really spend enough time identifying and testing our assumptions. Who has seen this in their own projects? So what's happening is agreement or alignment is assumed way too quickly. And we take for granted, we forget that different groups hold different views about what success looks like. What are different risks? Who will become accountable for what? What matters most? And we forget about it. We don't often realize this. And we use traditional meetings that are often not designed to explore complex problems. So those meetings end with consensus, but we still haven't achieved shared understanding about what we're trying to achieve. So here is the thing. This is not a communication issue. We often say it's a communication issue. The issue is that we haven't got a common framework, a process, a space where we can define project outcomes, understand and agree to a constraints, and define our success measures. And here is another thing. And if you follow me on LinkedIn, you might have seen my post on Monday. Do you think belief is important in project? Yes or no? Yeah, 80-20. Yeah. Do you actually believe in the project you are currently working on? So here is the thing. Most people, most teams don't. They agree, they commit, and they move forward. But belief is often not built. So let me ask you this. Have you ever worked on a project that has clearly defined business case? Everything looked pretty aligned. The plan looked pretty solid, but you felt something was off, something was missing. If you ever felt like that, the possibility is high that it's not a process issue, it's actually a belief issue. Type yes if you experienced that at least once. Because process will not build a belief. Okay, belief doesn't come from filling up your business case. It doesn't come from filling up any other template. But this is something that most teams are focusing on. They are right in the mechanics. But belief, it's something that is built when the problem or the opportunity is truly explored, when we bring different perspective to the table, when we challenge our assumptions, when people question, not just agree. So we don't build belief by writing our business case, because belief is built by struggling with the problem first. You with me? So it's not just about clarity. It's literally about bringing the team, bringing the process to the team where we can build the conviction. Okay, so the third mistake, governance without thinking. So what is the problem with the governance? A lot of the clients that we're working with have governance already defined at the project level or even at the company level. But what is often missing is the thinking at the start. We focus way too much on filling up documents instead of knowing what's the thinking, what is the way that we can explore the problem. Okay, we focus way too much on producing deliverables instead of guiding teams to understand how those deliverables help us in decision making. So especially in large organization, governance might be in place, but the thinking is what is missing. So how many of you start the project by filling up a template? It could be your business case. It could be your charter. Okay, type in a chat. How many of you start the project? Yeah, Daniel. Yeah, I'm experiencing a belief challenge right now. Yeah, that's great because it's not something that shows up. Okay, it's something that needs to be intentionally build. So reflect on that. How do we actually start projects? And then the next mistake, there it is, untested assumptions. So look, there is nothing wrong with the assumption. Assumptions relate to the past. It's the way we think about the problem. It's the way we think about the root cause. Assumptions also relate to how we see the current state and how we see the future state. Okay, they are everywhere. We make assumptions about the problem, about solution, about the timeline, about stakeholders, even about what's possible. The problem is not an assumption. The problem is that we hardly ever know what to do with them. The problem is that most of the time we don't have a process to identify them, to challenge them, and know what to do after that. You with me? So when someone says, here is a given, when the CEO says, I want you to take this as a given, here is the fact I want you to use. Okay? We need to ask, given according to whom? And we need to ask, how is this being a given? Because assumptions shape the way we look at our scope, outcomes, and also schedule. And especially the negative assumptions, when they show up, we call them surprises. Okay? And then the last one I will talk about today is risk that is often treated too late. So most projects don't struggle because the risks that were unknown, I talk about it in my book, they often struggle because initially the initial risk identified were not taken seriously. They were downplayed and they were treated as future issues that will be managed later. How many of you work on a project that has already a risk register in place? Yeah, great, Akin. Yeah. How many of you have seen risk register influencing key decisions? Here is the thing. So often risk engineers and risk registers and risk management is discussed after commitments were made. So this way, risk management is reactive, it's not strategic. It's about documentation, it's about control. So we need to make risk management more strategic by bringing the uncertainty and the awareness when decisions are still open. You with me? So those patterns show up again and again, no matter what industry, no matter how experienced teams are, no matter what geography. But my question to you is, what patterns exist in your projects? And is your system set up for projects to succeed or to struggle? Because if we don't change the way we start projects, we keep repeating the same mistakes and we keep achieving the same outcomes over and over. And that's why traditional approach to project management is often not enough. And we need a different way to think about how we're going to start projects. So those are 5 patterns that we see across different projects. Another thing, which is not a pattern, is just what happens, is how we actually make decisions. So here is another thing, especially if we make complex decisions in an uncertain environment. Most critical decisions are not individual decisions. They take place in a group environment. And what happens in a group environment? We are often not on our best behavior, especially during making complex decisions. So what happens is, without realizing it, and many people impose their own judgment. They protect their own interest. They're not saying what's on their mind, okay? So they self-censor themselves. They are not saying what is on their mind. Who knows what I'm talking about? So people usually struggle with listening to one another, okay? Because they come in with their own agenda to protect their own function. Okay. And they often adopt the mindset my way or highway. Okay, who knows what I'm talking about? Which means we often criticize, rationalize, we sell ideas, we protect our own interest. Especially if there is an environment within the project where leaders are sending messages such as, haven't we already talked about this? Or let's keep it simple. Who heard that one before? Or hurry up, we're running out of time. Or what does have to do with anything? Okay, so no one wants to be told that. Okay, so what happens is we shut down and we self-censor ourselves. And so no one wants to feel embarrassed or inadequate. So what my point is that conventional meetings are not designed for complex decision making because they do not promote effective thinking in the group. Just looking at the chat. Especially if the boss is a manager, not a leader. Yeah, that's right, Akin. Perfect. So how many of you heard about Sam Kainer? So Sam Kainer wrote one of my favorite books, Facilitator's Guide to Participation. So Sam Kainer is a global leader in group decision making, and he talks about how people make decisions in group environment. So if you look at that picture, this picture represents an idealistic approach to group decision making. So what do you actually see? If you look on the left, let's say 4 people came together to discuss a new topic, complex topic. And each circle represents an idea, and each arrow represents one person's idea, one person's line of thought. So what you can see, everyone is following each other's thoughts. Everyone stays on the same pace. Everyone listens to each other. Everyone feels heard. Everyone stays on board every step on the way. Is this how we make decisions? Yeah, I'm glad you know him, Daniel. Is this how we make decisions? So most leaders, maybe the one that are not real leaders, but most leaders would love us to make decisions that way. But unfortunately, we don't. And what's happening in the real life, that's really how we make decisions. We go on tangents. We just being humans. We can't stay on track. Okay, we just go and think about what we're gonna make for dinner. We wait what we're gonna say. We think about what we're gonna say before we actually say. We don't listen because that's just who we are. Okay, and if we all believe in the idealistic decision making and your real experience doesn't match that, you begin to blame your team and you say your team is dysfunctional. Okay, but what's happening without a structured approach to decision making in a group environment, the loudest person wins and the whole group decision making becomes ineffective. It just becomes groupthink. Okay, so what Sam Kainer says, he introduced something called the diamond model of participation. So where if you look from the left to the right, where we start with divergent zone, where we are exploring different ideas, exploring different perspectives, testing assumptions, go beyond our typical familiar options. And then later on, we are converging, we are prioritizing, and eventually we're making a decision. But what Sam Kainer says that somewhere in the middle, even though we bring a structure to the process, teams experience what he talks about the groan zone, the struggle zone. This is where everything feels messy. This is where everything feels confusing. This is where it feels slow, where people feel misunderstood, and where many leaders panic and they say, well, hold on, let's stop the meeting. Let's call the meeting for next week and talk about it next week. Who knows what I'm talking about? And this is why strategy development takes sometimes 2 months if it just could take 1 day or 2 days. So many projects or initiatives were prematurely canceled for the same reason, because the ground zone was just unbearable. But what I'm here to tell you, this is a natural consequence, a natural part of the process where diverse perspectives get brought to explore complex problems. It's a direct, inevitable consequence of the diversity that exists in the group. And not only that, but the act of going through those misunderstandings is the part that must be done to lay the foundation for sustainable agreements. So those teams that struggle at the start, they wrestle with different perspectives and they come out aligned. Those teams will execute faster with fewer surprises during the execution than those teams that skip those hard questions, skip those conversations, and they will have one person simply make all decisions. And that's why framing workshops often feel very uncomfortable. But that discomfort is the cost of alignment, and that alignment is worth the cost. And groups need to recognize this. And Keynes says that that's why you need someone in the room who has no vested interest in the outcome of conversation, who can create the structure for participation, who can minimize the impact of groupthink and create not just a safe place for conversation, but a brave space to explore different perspectives. And that person is not going to be a hero. That person cannot be the project manager. That person is a guide, is someone from outside who is neutral, someone whose main role would be to create the conditions for better thinking together. Okay, so it's not about letting everyone talk. It's about really unlocking those diverse perspectives by bringing the right structure to the group of people so that we can understand the problem, we can avoid the blind spots or minimize the blind spots, and we can come up with new innovative solutions and shared understanding right at the end. So using that model, I want you to consider that participation is actually a governance tool, not just a feel-good tactic. You with me? And this is something that I had to learn the hard way. So a little bit more about my background. So I started in my career in quality assurance, working for EPC engineering companies in London, working on major capital projects, mainly in development space and later in execution. And out of curiosity, who is familiar with ISO 9001? Type yes in the chat. Yes. Great, thank you. So great. So you know what I mean. I was working as a lead auditor, and my job was to bring quality and project management systems onto a project and then audit the team against those standards. And let me be clear, the standard is brilliant. It brings the structure, discipline, and it does improve consistency. And I truly believe that if we follow the process, if we can prove compliance, if we can meet requirements, we will succeed. At one point, I was even the face on the magazine issued by the Institute of Quality Assurance. So trust me, I was all around ISO 9001. But over time, I noticed something that really started bothering me. Because what I saw that projects were compliant, but they still experience struggle. Who knows what I'm talking about? There was still rework, especially in the execution phase. We still went through a phase of misalignment. and we were not always delivering what was expected. And for me, that was really disappointing because I knew we were compliant. We were looking good on the paper, but I knew something was missing. I didn't know what it was. So way too often, especially if you're someone working for an engineering company, when you only see one lens, one part of the project life cycle, and we were at that time focused only on how to execute according to the contract, how to follow the process, how to create deliverables, and how to complete them on time. We were never asking questions, are we even working on the right projects? Have we made the right decisions? And when I got exposed to the full project life cycle, from the idea to the concept, then development and execution, that's when something shifted for me. And what I realized is that value is not created in the execution. It's logged much earlier. Value is defined in how we define the problem, how we approach options, and how we make decisions. And this was something I didn't fully understand at that time. And this is something that changed everything. And it got me to move from quality assurance to governance and facilitation. And it got me to think about how we can support teams right at the start in the way they think about the project, not just in execution. And that's where everything started to change. So, if belief doesn't come from documents, where does it come from? So my experiences led me to think that belief on a project, okay, Daniel, that's for you. It's how we think together before we commit. And this is where opportunity framing comes in. It is a structured process that happens right at the beginning of the project. It helps to navigate the complexities of the project initiation by helping the team to explore the value proposition of the project first and find the best way to pursue it to realize the project. So it is not just a workshop, but the process is expressed as a workshop. It is not just a brainstorming, but the process includes brainstorming. Okay, this is really when we step back because we're trying to understand, does this project even make sense? And what you see on the slide, it just to show you that this process, which takes between 1 to 3 days, includes group working together, exploring the problem. We use plenary sessions, we use small group discussions, we use flip chart, we use sticky notes, and we use this process for capital projects in oil and gas, mining, infrastructure projects. And I have also used the same approach to work on nonprofits and initiatives in nonprofits. So teams need to answer very simple but often avoided questions. What problems are we actually trying to solve? Why are we pursuing this opportunity? Where is the value going to come from? What is in the scope? What is outside of the scope? And what is it that we are unsure about? What assumptions are we making and what are the true facts? What does success actually look like? What options do we have? And what decision do we need and in what order? And only then we build our deliverables plan and our assurance plan. And if you can't answer those questions at the start, execution won't save you because you will be executing without having that clarity. So framing happens before you commit to a solution. It's where you test whether the project even makes sense. So you could say that framing is a form of quality management, which applies right at the start. So instead of asking, are we doing things right? which really relates to the work that we do in execution. We are asking, are we doing the right thing? You with me? So at the end of the day, framing report provide inputs to a variety of disciplines. And this is where you get input to develop your business case, to provide or update your cost and schedule estimates, to update your cost baseline, to create your stakeholders management plan, to create your regulator management plan, to develop your assurance plan, risk management plan, and later on, your execution plan. So I know a lot of you today are familiar with the framing. Okay, I can see you. What are your clients telling you? We have one more person. What are your clients telling you about framing when they're nodding their heads? My clients often say, Iwona, we don't have the time to do it. That's what a lot of the people say. So usually it's the process. Usually new clients come to me when they've tried everything and when they made a lot of mistakes. But believe me, it is really a best practice that have been used for decades in the oil and gas as well as in pharma. And it really practice and it comes from a decision analysis, which is promoted by the Society of Decision Professionals. But when my clients tell me, we don't have time for this, I say to them one thing. The question is that not when that we have time or not have time. The question is, when do you want to pay? Do you want to pay early on, doing 1 or 2 days workshop plus preparation? Or do you want to pay later with rework, misalignment, delays, and surprises? So spend few days early on creating an alignment and clarity and building your decision-driven roadmap, and that will save you months correcting the problem later on. So look, the best projects are not the one that gets to execution the fastest. The best project teams are the one that understand the problem the earliest. So let me give you my favorite example. So how many of you know about Corpus Christi? So I've lived in Corpus Christi. That was the first city we lived in when we moved from Australia to the US. And Corpus Christi, it's a really small, nice, beautiful town in South Texas. And recently they've been working on developing a desalination facility to support a growing industry water demand. And it really makes sense. The technology was known. But what happens is, over time, the cost started to escalate dramatically. So what you see on the screen, from the initial estimate of building desalination facility from $140 million, the cost ballooned to over 1.5 billion. So last year in September, after 13 hours of public meeting, the project was stopped after already investing $50 million. And it wasn't an engineering issue. It was a framing and alignment issue. The key stakeholders, the local government, was not aligned at the start. The assumptions were not properly identified and tested. The long-term value wasn't very clearly agreed. The project was stopped last year because the thinking wasn't complete. You with me? So right now, the project is in a recycle. That's right. They keep talking about this. Yeah. So this is an example where it wasn't about the execution. It wasn't even about the technology. It wasn't even about the concept. but it was really about the alignment between decision makers about what we're trying to achieve and on what basis. Okay, so once you've done your thinking, once you frame your opportunity properly, the next question is, how do we actually manage this project so we don't lose that clarity? And this is where decision gate process comes in. So decision gate process, which is really a stage gate process, it's a governance framework where you can take any project and break it down into stages and gates. So you conduct your work during the stage, and then at the gate, you come in and you ask your questions. Do we have enough confidence to proceed? Have we done the work we say we're going to do? And do we still want to proceed? If the answer to your questions is yes, only then you release the funding and you release the resources and you move to the next stage. So this is a classic approach to reduce the uncertainty step by step rather than commit everything up front. So most organizations, especially in working in a complex environment, especially the ones in the oil and gas and mining, follow this structure. When you identify the opportunity, and then in the assess phase, this is where the opportunity framing comes in. And this is when you're doing the work to understand the value proposition. And that's where you assess the fit with your organizational strategy. This is where you build the project governance. And this is when you develop your roadmap. And at the gate one, that's where leadership would ask the question, are we actually solving the right problem? This is where you're seeking evidence on stakeholders alignment, clarity on value, and fit with your organizational strategy. In the concept phase, that's when we explore a wide range of alternatives. And at the end of that phase, we're seeking confidence. Do we have a viable solution? Have we tested our assumptions? We update our business case. And the goal is not rushing to the design, but to identify the best option. In the develop phase, that's when selected concept is being engineered and tested. That's when the main question is, does the solution actually work as intended? Are we ready to move into the execution phase? In the execution, that's when we make it work. We deliver, we execute, we bring it to life, and we commission. And the last gate, the gate 4, is are we ready to move into the new environment, deliver safely and successfully? And usually between 6 to 12 months from the last move in the operate phase, we ask ourselves a question. Did we deliver the value as expected? What value have we delivered? What benefits have we realized? Because the ultimate goal is not just about building something, but it's about delivering value. So the main reason why we roll out the stage gate process is to reduce uncertainty before committing more money. So each phase will give you more information. Each gate verifies the readiness, and the government really ensures that you are making informed decision. But here is the catch. It's not just about governance. Decision gate will only test what the team has framed. And that's the thing we often see missing with the clients we're working with. So if your framing at the start is weak, your first gate becomes more about approving uncertainty. So you approve something you don't fully understand. So that's why I often say, without the framing, your governance is just about compliance. And then without decision gates, if you just do framing, the framing, it's only about a workshop, but it has no impact. So you need both. So my question to you, look at the project you are involved in. How many of those projects have real decision points where leadership can stop, pivot, and even change their mind? Or do most projects just simply continue forward regardless? So most projects often don't stop, even though things are unclear, even though assumptions get weaker, even though risks are increasing. They never go back because they never put this system properly in place. So, if this resonates with you, it's because you've seen it. You felt this, and maybe you've even tried to fix it with a better tracking tool, maybe with a new AI, or maybe with a better execution. But the real shift happens right at the start. And that's why I've created Mastering the Decision Gate Process training course. Later in April, we're starting our 8-week cohort. And we're going to not just teach you the theory, but we help you to apply that thinking at the start. So, who is this for? If you are someone involved or leading or contributing or influencing or making key decisions on complex projects, if you are someone involved in cross-functional initiatives, if you're someone involved in AI implementation, this is something for you. So very often, especially we're getting that recently about AI implementation, everyone agrees it's a good idea. But no one discusses what problem we are solving, what success actually looks like, where is the value going to come from. So the projects move forward, but later on they experience low adoption and expectations don't really match the initial intent, and often the value at the end is unclear. Not because the solution was wrong, but because the problem was never fully framed and the alignment wasn't in place. And that's the exact skill set that we help you build. So, in the first week, we're working with you to reflect on your own experiences in capital projects. You will work with our case studies and our using our exercise to really understand how the symptoms in execution can match to early decisions made or not made early on. In week 2, we teach you everything about decision gate process, how to scale, how to build, how to assign decision making, what front end loading is about. In week 3, we teach you about opportunity framing workshop. You get access to our bespoke framework called PATH. We give you our checklist, our templates that you can literally take straight away from our system and run with your teams. Week 4, we teach you how to get ready for decision gates. We talk about the biases. We talk about the amount of preparation. We talk about how to set up a good decision gate for your project. In week 5, we talk about how to assign, how to integrate risk and assurance to your projects. In week 6, we talk about how to bring it all together. And you do it all the way till week 8. Right at the end, from week 3, you will be invited to bring your own projects and use it right at the end to present it to all of us or share your insight so you can actually have experience to frame your own project using our tools. You also have access to our portal where you get to see, where you get to ask questions, meet with other peers, and get answers to your questions straight away. So this, if you are a consultant, This is your cutting edge knowledge because most consultants are brought into delivery. Very few are able to step early on and actually shape the problem. And when you are the one able to bring clarity in a complex, uncertain environment, bring alignment, your role become irreplaceable. So anyway, if that resonates with you, check out our website. Registration is open from today. If that's something that feels right for you, I would love to have you inside, but no pressure. If you want to apply this properly, check it out. You also get delivered book that we just published, and we are starting on April the 29th. Okay, so questions. What are some of the questions that we are dealing with? I'm just going through the checklist. What are some of the questions? Uh, Thank you, Akin. Thank you so much for initiating this priceless conversation. At the front end, the goal is not speed, it's clarity, it's truth, it's alignment before commitment. And I don't want you to think about that I make speed something wrong. There is nothing wrong about speed. So I want you to leave this session knowing that there is nothing wrong about speed. What is wrong is to move to execution without fully understanding what we're trying to achieve, without having clarity around the trade-offs, without exploring different options and understanding our interfaces. So speed is not a problem. The same communication is not a problem. The problem is lack of framework or the process in place where you can bring decision makers together and define the outcomes, understand the constraints, and align on the success measures. Okay, so if anything, the register, I need the book. I have already bought 10 copies. Beautiful, Matthew. Thank you so much. If you have questions, if that's something on your mind, but you would love to see how we teach, you would like to take a look and see our portal, book a call with me through the website, and I will love to show you around, give you details how we teach this knowledge because we are on a mission to bring opportunity framing as a discipline to project management. This is something that every project, no matter what industry, no matter what experience, no matter what geography, they should have access to. So thank you, Audrey, so much sharing your skills and experiences. You're most welcome again. So thank you so much, everyone. Enjoy the rest of the day. And don't forget to frame your next project and wish you all the best with all of your opportunities. See you next time. Bye.